I have no idea what any of this says, so I'm having a guess. And no idea of what was said about me. So as a quick introduction, hello, my name is Angie Judge. I'm from Dexhibit, where we do big data analytics for visitor attractions such as museums and galleries. And we work with some of the largest museums from all over the world. I'm also chair of the American Alliance of Museums Technology Board and of the Museum Computer Network Data Group. So on all three fronts, thank you for having me here today. It is a real pleasure to be with you. Following along from what the last speaker said, I'm quite often asked in my line of work of whether AI will cause the end of museum leadership, that with AI do we no longer need people to think? And of course I disagree wholeheartedly with this statement. But what I do think is true is that with AI, it will cause issues for us in the museum sector if we do not embrace it. And the reason I know that to be true is that we have been here before. If we stood up here today and said we don't need technology to run museums, we don't need the internet to connect with our visitors, everybody would shake their heads. And so I think give it a few years and the same will be true for AI, that we need AI and we will need AI in the future to compete with other visitor attractions, to gain attention for our visitors and to deliver excellent experiences for them. So what has brought us here today? There are, as was mentioned before, there are many decades of research that have been out there for a long time now in the AI space. But the fact that we've got so much compute power and so much connectivity behind us means that it's now very real to start putting these things into practice. And the challenge for us is not so much necessarily to come up with new technologies, but to work out how on earth to apply these into our field and how to go about changing the way we do things in the museum as a result of them. There are lots of different branches of artificial intelligence. We just heard from one before around deep learning, but there are lots of other ways to incorporate AI into our day-to-day in the museum. I use the two that you can see at the top here, machine learning to help predict what visitors will do, and natural language to help work out why. To give you an example of what those two things look like, with machine learning we can provide the results of an exhibition's performance or different exhibitions over the last decade or so. And we can use that data to listen for the unique signals of things like what happens when the marketing budget is bigger, what happens when the ticket price is higher, what happens when it's a single artist show versus a multi-artist show. And we can use that data to help make forecasts and predictions about simulating future exhibitions to inform decisions as we're going into planning. With natural language, we can take thousands and thousands of visitor comments at scale, free-form thoughts on behalf of our visitors, and we can use those to help pull out emotions and sentiment and key themes to understand what our visitors are thinking and find opportunities to improve visitor experience on their behalf. So we heard of some examples prior of how AI can be used to create art, but it can also be used to do so much more in the museum. At the Barnes Foundation, for example, they use AI to help visitors explore their collection in new ways. At SF MoMA, they have a nice bot that helps their visitors connect with the museum and find artwork that way. We use AI at Dexhibit to help with museum management, to help either the operations and the strategic planning of the museum, or even make recommendations for the museum's ongoing operations, so very much behind the scenes. And I think it all boils down to this one job of getting the industry to go from more gut feel, where we have been in the past, to more insight-inspired of where we want to be in the future. And it's a really hard change to make for us as leaders and as people. And in the meantime, hopefully, we will get rid of a few more clicker counters, which are still around many museums today. But the thing about AI is that you need a lot of big data or a lot of data and analytics to inform it. And there's a big fear in museums that we don't have enough data. And I think that fear is not true, because when you think about it, when you walked through the door today, you were probably counted in some form. You've bought a ticket to be here. Maybe you belong to the museum's membership group here. You might have visited their website. I know I did. Maybe we use social media to talk about it. Maybe we bought a coffee in the cafe downstairs, or we might get a souvenir in the shop on our way out. And so when you think about it, there's lots of data lying around the museum. And it helps us understand our visitors before, during, and after their visit. It helps us understand what they're doing on site, but also what they're doing out in the world. And it helps us understand what they're doing in person, but also what they're doing online. But the problem is that information is hidden and it's trapped in lots of different systems. Because when you think about it, we need a lot of technology to run a museum these days. And often these systems are siloed and they're disparate. They sit in lots of different departments owned by different people. So a big part of the challenge is getting data out of those systems and putting it up into the cloud so that we can do useful things with it. But once we do achieve that, by democratizing the access to data for lots of different people around the museum, we can help use this insight to get more visitors through our doors, to get them engaging and sometimes spending more, and to get them coming back as loyal members. These are the top 10 use cases that we see commonly used by museums of what they can do once they have big data analytics and AI in their team's hands. Everything from just making it faster to get access to insight or reports, right through to things like using Wi-Fi to track where visitors are going and where they're spending their time, to understand which of their marketing campaigns are performing or why their membership products are starting to churn. To give you a couple of examples of what this looks like, at MoMA in New York, the museum has been undergoing a huge renovation and only a few weeks ago reopened to the public after being closed for a few months. They took their footfall and ticketing data together with their Wi-Fi data, where they've been using their visitors' cell phones to track them around the museum and understand anonymously where people are spending their time. And then they mix that with their social reviews using natural language. And what they were able to do from that was understand the point at which the museum became crowded enough that it impacted visitor happiness. So how many people could they put in the museum and still have positive visitor outcomes? And at what point did the amount of crowds of people between you and Van Gogh and your selfie make you have a poorer visit? At Space Center in Houston, which is NASA's gateway, they've been using machine learning to predict how many visitors will come to the museum, right down to the hour. And it helps them with staff planning, because as we know, staffing is one of the most expensive costs to run a museum. And they even get down to the point now of predicting how many people will go on tram rides out to Mission Control to see Rocket Park so that they can predict how long their visitors will have to wait in queues, and therefore how that will impact their visitor experience. And then one of my favorites, this is the National Museum of African American Heritage and Culture, which is the Smithsonian's newest of its 19 museums, and this one is in Washington, DC. They see several million visitors a year, and to be able to pack them in safely into a small building, the Smithsonian are using machine learning not just to predict how many visitors will come, but how many people who book their free advance passes that won't show up. And then they use that number, which varies significantly every day, to work out how many extra passes that they can do. A bit like when you fly on an airplane or stay in a hotel, and your airline might actually allow more passengers than they're expecting, or more passengers than they have capacity from, so that they can maximize the number of people. And this technique has allowed the Smithsonian to open their doors to a lot more visitors than they would have otherwise seen. So we've talked about some of the examples of how it can be used, and there are lots of fabulous outcomes that you can have with AI. But I do want to offer a few words of caution around it. One of the things that comes up with projects around data is the issue of security and privacy. And these are really elements of data governance. Another one that's really important is understanding provenance, or where data comes from and what has happened to it, because if we're making decisions off that data, we should know those things. But one that becomes really, really important when we use AI is ethics, because when something is making a decision on our behalf, we want to know that it's going to make a good decision just like we would. And so, not to put any museum on the spot, here are a few examples of where this has gone wrong out in the wider world. Like in the US Justice, where they were using machine learning to predict an offender's likelihood to reoffend. The man on the left-hand side, whose name I forget, Bernard, he was rated a high likelihood to offend. The man on the right-hand side of this picture on our left, his name is Dylan, and he was rated a low likelihood to offend. Bernard didn't reoffend, Dylan did. Dylan had the more significant history, but as you can see, there was probably some other factors that that machine learning algorithm was using to make its remarks. This one in the middle is from where I'm from, which is in New Zealand. This was a New Zealand government example. They were using machine vision to help them automatically process passport photos. And unfortunately, they told this particular applicant that their eyes were closed during their submission, which you can imagine was incredibly offensive for that person to experience. And the one on the right-hand side, and please excuse the big red blob in the middle of it, was an example from Microsoft, who put out a bot to the world, which went horribly wrong, and a very famous example. And so you can imagine the sorts of circumstances where these scenarios could easily play themselves out in a museum. We've got museum machine learning models which might be predicting or advising visitors on what route to take, or we might be saying which donor is most likely to donate or which member is most likely to turn. We've got machine vision that is using collection images to say, for example, place people in a kitchen, and it might be more likely to place me in a kitchen than it would be to place a man. And we've got a lot of museums these days using bots to communicate with their visitors, including at the Smithsonian, where they're using actual robots called Pepper to be able to roll around their museums and talk to their guests. And you can imagine that creates a lot of very dangerous things when somebody else is communicating with your visitors other than you. And so what I suggest is, when you're going into AI, don't leap into everything at once. Take it stage by stage. Start off by looking at the descriptive analytics. Start off by just seeing and understanding where your data is coming from and what's happening to it and what it's telling you. Then get into the forecasting, and then get into the more advanced use cases where you're using AI to help make decisions. And as you go, pay a lot of attention to data governance, particularly that journey from worrying just about privacy through to thinking about ethics. And if it's a topic that interests you, we do also have a free book. I have a couple of copies here with me, but you can order yours online as well. This is Leadership Best Practices for Implementing AI in Museums. So thank you very much for having me here today, and looking forward to continuing the discussion afterwards.